Well, can you believe we're on module 3 already? We're looking at research and planning. And true to form, here's another little travel story. I'm quite enjoying teaching these courses here, partly because I get to relive all these amazing trips that I went on. It's a lot of fun for me to share with you. And I hope lots of the information is inspiring you, but obviously giving you those nuts and bolts, strategies and tools. And that's what we're going to get into here about the research and planning. So I thought for this one, I would talk about the trip I did. It was a road trip, and it was San Francisco to Las Vegas to Los Angeles. So I always called it the California road trip, but officially Las Vegas is in Nevada, not in California. But anyway, you get the gist. And where this story actually started was I was in London. I was working full time in an office, and I was generally wanting to have a bit of a break and go somewhere a bit adventurous. Again, it was a bit the same way I'd chosen Australia because it was the other side of the world. This is a few years later, but I was like, okay, I've done a few more trips around Europe, but I'd like to do something a bit more adventurous again. And this time was going to do it with my friend Shrin, who also has SMA and very much the same needs. And so we were sort of debating where we might like to go. And we were actually looking at Brazil. We'd both, having done America a little bit, I think Shrin had done Australia separately when I'd done it around the same time. And a few Europe trips. We were sort of looking at that South America or Asia or Africa as that new frontier of people with SMA. And we're sort of in our late 20s. And so we decided Brazil would be amazing. And in terms of this module and looking at research and planning, we use some of the tools that we'll be getting into more specific details later, but things like Google and Google Maps. So we said Brazil, and we were then looking at blogs and trying to find other disabled people that have been there, which back then was a lot more difficult than it is now. There's a lot more accessible travel bloggers on Instagram and TikTok these days, which is great for you when you start on your journey of planning. But we couldn't find those types of people so much. This was 2009, 2010 when we went in 2010, but it was over a year of planning. And so when we were looking around Brazil and Rio de Janeiro and for accessibility information, it was just not a lot of the information, and the information that was there we didn't feel very trusting of, and we tried to reach out to certain accommodation providers, which again we'll talk a bit in later modules, but it just didn't feel sure enough. I think we had a bit of a gut feeling that it wasn't going to be the right choice for us on this occasion. I don't want that to then sound like always not going for the first choice is right, but there's something in there, a lesson around when you have tried a lot of things and you're not quite confident and you've got maybe like an intuitive feeling. It's also fine to not do that trip. And I still hope that I'll go to Brazil another time, but the trip that we did was just as amazing. The benefit of then going to America, USA, was that there was a lot more information about the accommodations there. And it was the same language, which was a really big positive. So whilst we'd attempted that newer frontier, in the end, there is a reality with being in the wheelchair that the sort of North America, Europe, and sort of Australia and New Zealand just seemed to be, certainly 10 years ago, a bit more equipped for disabled people. And I think that's changing over time in different ways. When it came to the trip, we needed to find accommodation in San Francisco, Vegas, and LA. And we then just really used a lot of the tools we'll be talking about. So Google was the one of just trying to learn a bit more about the city and seeing if there was any general reviews. I think we did look in some Facebook groups, but it was the earlier days of Facebook groups. But again, we'll talk about that a bit more later in this module. And then we looked at things like hotel.com, booking.com, Airbnb, and just used the filters, which again, the filters were not very developed and advanced. So it's quite nice to see the progress and the fact that if you're looking to travel now, there's a lot more things that are in your favor, whereas back in 2010, we were kind of pioneering in some ways. So yeah, and ultimately we looked at our needs that obviously you'll have created in module 2 yourself, and in understanding our needs around wheelchairs, around PAs, around hoists, around accessibility, we went about finding the right hotels. We had our budget, which we were aware of, and that played a bit of a factor as well. So one other tool or strategy or tactic that I would say from the trip was that we looked for the larger brand chain hotels. So I'm trying to remember now off the top of my head what they were in America, but if it was the UK, which is still a great general tip to share, it would be the Holiday Inns, the Premier Inns. And the reason is that in the UK and the US, and quite often in Europe and other countries as well, they have more of a compliance to have a certain amount of accessible rooms. So when we were looking for hotels on the America trip, instead of going to those smaller individual boutique hotels where generally they didn't have the same level of accessibility, we knew that those large kind of multinational global brand chains would have a number of accessible rooms. And obviously bear in mind that it was myself and Shrin, so we both needed an accessible room, and we both had PAs with us on the trip. So yeah, that was a bit of a hack, if you like, that meant we just narrowed the search already for those known brands. But yeah, ultimately we stayed at really amazing places in San Francisco, and then in Vegas. I remember we were in the MGM Grand, and there was a bit of a glitch actually around one of the rooms, and so the hotel made a mistake, so they bumped us up to VIP. So not only was it still accessible, but it was uber impressive and like celebrity status, and it had like a jacuzzi in the room. So these are these kind of random stories you get that when places mess up, which again we'll talk more about as a particular module later, it can be quite stressful and not good, but sometimes it can get fixed quite quickly, and you can almost end up with a positive that you're in an even nicer room than you were planning to be in. And then in LA, I just remember how, again, the room was a sort of standard accessible room, but it had been quite cold in Las Vegas, a bit like the Australia story, that in Vegas it was freezing, but in LA it was nice and warm, and we were on the beaches and we were playing pool in the bars. And so even coming back to the inspirational part of this, you know, Shrin and I had this amazing time where we also had a vehicle, which obviously we're talking about accommodation more, but a need was that we had to get around. And so we found a hire car that took both of us in our wheelchairs as well, which was cool, driving around California with all the music playing, and yeah, just the general USA kind of experience and culture and lifestyle. So again, if you want to read more about it, it's in my book, which is in the bonus material, but I've tried to connect that story with the specifics of this module, which essentially was the research and the planning and some of the tools and the strategies of how to go about finding the right place to stay in. But as I say, we'll get stuck in next to the more step-by-step guide, looking at some of the AI tools, looking at some of the resources that have come out in the 10 years or more than 10 years that I went to this trip to America. So yeah, we'll crack on to the next one.